Destructive fires are burning in California, and San Diego just had one of its hottest Julys ever. Is this the new normal for our changing climate? Congressman Duncan Hunter says President Trump is under attack from the deep state. Meanwhile, another president backs his opponent. And Padres fans are being asked to keep the faith and trust the process, even as losing seasons keep piling up. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, Rob Creer, who writes about weather and climate for the San Diego Union Tribune, veteran San Diego sportscaster Lee Hacksaw Hamilton, Michael Smolens, columnist for the Union Tribune, and KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson. Well, record heat from San Diego to the Arctic, ocean temps more common to Hawaii than Southern California, a dozen deadly wildfires overtaxing California's ability to fight them. Largely unheeded warnings about climate change are manifest. One forecaster calls it extreme events as part of a persistent pattern. And now an attempt to do something about it is blocked by the Trump administration. And Rob, your story in July's extreme heat, it focused on this locked-in jet stream. What's that about?
Well, the jet stream is sort of like the dividing line between what's going on in the northern latitudes and the southern latitudes. And typically it's colder above the jet stream and warmer below it. It carries the air around the globe, and when it gets locked in place like it has this last year, the heat can build with high pressure systems, and it can keep growing and growing on itself. Normally the jet would kind of wobble like a hose, and it would change. I love that metaphor, yeah. And it would change the weather every few days or every week or so, but this summer is sort of just locked in spots, and that has created extreme heat above the Arctic in Greece and in Tokyo and Canada, England, and of course down here too. And how was it in July? Records and near records throughout the month? Locally, Ramona hit 117, which is 6 degrees, not just the high for that day or that month, but any time, any year. And San Diego had its 5th warmest July ever. It had its 3rd warmest July day. Escondido had its warmest July. Many places were on the edge of having their warmest ever, but were extremely warm.
And Eric, it's not just on land here. You had a story about the ocean temps.
I was out at the Scripps Pier yesterday, and they took an ocean measurement on Wednesday, a surface measurement there, and measured the ocean there at 78.6 degrees. That's the warmest it's ever been recorded there. The previous warm was back in July of 1931. And what the researchers said was that this is part of a trend. Since 2004, the surface temperatures have been going up and staying up. There was a spate of time, 2015, 2016, where global events like El Nino and the blob, that warm ocean water off the coast, rose the temperature significantly. They've come back down since then, but not down to the level they were before. So they worry that trend is going to continue along the coast.
All right, and scientists have been cautious fellows and women. They are loath to really connect any weather event to climate change. We'll get to a little more than that in a minute, but Governor Jerry Brown isn't so shy. He likened what happened to climate change in real time. Let's hear a bite from what he said this week.
So we're in a bold, unprecedented experiment with 40 million people and 32 million vehicles that burn flammable oil and gas. So we're going to have to adapt. We're going to change our technology, but in the meantime, we're going to spend a hell of a lot of money, and there is going to be a lot of unpleasant events and suffering as a result.
All right. So, Rob, do climate researchers agree that we're seeing the tangible results now of a changing climate?
You know, I used to talk to the climate researchers at Scripps back in the early 2000s and even early this decade. And they would say these sort of events are indicative of what we would see with a changing climate. Now they're pretty much flat out coming out and saying this is at least in part due to climate change. They're not being shy about it.
And what has been long predicted, and they're saying, is it happening even faster than the computer models were showing?
Exactly, which, we talk about whether we're in a new normal. They're saying we don't know what the new normal is yet. We're on an evolutionary path where it could not be the worst right now. It could get much worse down the road.
Lee?
Rob and Eric, as you've talked to the climatologist, we have much more violent weather, I'd say, over the last 5 years, whether it's Superstorm Sandy, the violent hurricanes, obviously the terrible tornadoes in Tornado Alley, and what's happened out here on the entire West Coast.
Harvey in Houston last year.
Yeah, everything that has happened with the forest fires. Do they link global warming to everything that has now happened in terms of the violent breakouts we've had, from blizzards to floods to hurricanes to fires?
What they normally tend to say is that global climate change has upped the odds of these things happening. Most of the time they don't say climate change caused this, but it made it more likely.
Eric, I wanted to get to what we were talking about also in the opening. Main push by the Obama administration, tougher mileage standards for cars and trucks. It's being weakened now by the Trump administration. What was the proposal that they put forth on Thursday?
We'll see if it actually does get weakened. And I guess the only people that we should give congratulations to, the only people who might be surprised by this announcement this week, because they were probably just rescued from a desert island somewhere out in the Pacific, and because this is something that the Trump administration had telegraphed even before Trump became president. He wanted to adjust those mileage standards. The details came out this week. You know, he wants to, the current standard is at 35.5 miles per gallon fleet-wide for a company. The Obama administration had asked those to increase and ramp up to about 55 miles per gallon, roughly, by 2026 or so. And the Trump administration says, look, they should kind of level off close to where they are now. And it was hard to be surprised by this because we knew it was coming, but at the same time, there are a lot of people who are speaking up about it. And there are some people who stand to benefit who might not be speaking out in favor of it, but they're not exactly speaking out against the move.
Is it primarily the petroleum industry? I mean, we read about the auto industry is not going wild over this. In fact, that they're, if not ambivalent, and some people even think it's a bad idea. Who's he doing it for, I guess, is the question.
The fossil fuel industry,
Yeah.
I think, is a big benefactor here. There's a chance that it could increase gas consumption by 20%, which is a pretty big chunk of gas that they would be able to sell then. It would increase demand for gas if these standards are not raised.
And more emissions, of course, going up.
More emissions are going up. The automobile industry has been kind of interesting on this, I think. This is something that they did ask for early. They wanted to have that single standard. They wanted to get rid of the California exemption, the California standards. They were interested in having a lower target. But it's not something that they talk about publicly now, because I think they've recognized that there is some public interest in moving these mileage standards up. And so they've kind of soft-pedaled what they're saying publicly about it right now. Interesting, though, when Elaine Chao, the transportation secretary, spoke out about this. The announcement came yesterday. In the press release, she said more realistic standards are going to promote a healthy economy by bringing newer, safer, cleaner, and more fuel-efficient vehicles to U.S. roads, and we look forward to receiving public input on this issue. And I thought,
I got to laugh. That sounds like Orwellian doublespeak. More fuel-efficient standards here by weakening the standards.
Weakening the standards. Yeah, it's interesting choice of words, but I think it says a lot about where the administration is on this position.
Now, how likely are these to get modified? It's got to be a big public debate. Jerry Brown and many other states are vowing to bring legal action and fight fiercely against this.
In some sense, we're just beginning down the road of the battle over these. California and a number of other states, I think 20 other states, have vowed to fight this in court. The big thing for California is there's a possibility in this request that California could lose its exemption from the Clean Air Act. California had the right to have tougher standards as a result of some legislation that Ronald Reagan championed when he was governor of California. They asked for that exemption, and they've been able to use that exemption to increase the air quality emission standards. It's something that they're going to fight for, and if they lose it, it could change the landscape of pollution control in the country. But again, it's the beginning of a long, I think, legal battle, and we'll have to wait and see where that ends up.
Last question in this segment, and I'll toss it to you, Michael. When does this become a viable political issue? Or is just the climate change that's happening faster than a lot of scientists thought, but still pretty slowly?
Well, I think it has been for a while, particularly in California, and I think more, Democratic and liberal states, obviously. The governor has made climate change, a central theme of his tenure or second go-around in these last 2 terms he's had. Whereas the Attorney General of California, who's up for re-election, has been constantly suing the Trump administration. I think that there's a political component to that, but on all these things, the governor has actually been more measured than a lot of Democrats in how he approaches the administration. But on this, he has really confronted them. So it is a viable political issue, and I think that, does this get down to the granular level of congressional races, as we'll talk about? I'm not so sure, but to a degree it will. I think climate change is there. It sort of depends, like on the state, it depends on the district.
Okay, all right, we're going to move on, but it is life on the planet is kind of the ultimate stakes here, so you would think it would become an issue at some point. Well, just over 90 days till the much anticipated November midterm election. Democrats, of course, are eager to gain control of the House, if not the U.S. Senate. One seat still not seen in play is the safe East San Diego County District of Republican Duncan Hunter Jr. Yet that seat is in the headlines this week. And Michael, start with Hunter's attack here on the Department of Justice. It kind of echoed the vitriol we've seen from the president.
Yeah, it really was sort of a remarkable 1-minute speech. I mean, he was limited, as they often are in certain segments on the House floor, to 1-minute speeches, and he packed a whole lot in there. He called, the Justice Department said it was filled with subversive partisans, and that was out to overturn the election, destroy the president. Basically, he was saying that the Department of Justice, which ostensibly is under the control of the president, is out to overthrow the country, the current government. So it was really a remarkable thing. Again, it sort of fit in. He did it as part of the impeachment process, or the introduction of the articles of impeachment of Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and that whole move. Its actuality and happening is probably pretty limited, but it's seen as a political effort to defend the president, because of these ongoing investigations. What, of course, Duncan Hunter didn't mention is that he also was under investigation by the Department of Justice for misuse of campaign funds. So to the degree that anything undermines the Department of Justice, perhaps there's some thinking that helps his cause as well.
All right, we've got a bite here from some of that here, just to hear how remarkable it was. Let's see that.
I call on this Congress to root out all the corrupt lawyers and bureaucrats in the DOJ and FBI so the greatest president of my generation can do the work that the American people duly elected him to do. Over the next 5 weeks, Congress will not be around to watch the president's back and hold those subversive partisan officials accountable.
The subversive officials, this impeachment thing, that likely to succeed?
I don't think so. I mean, the Republican leaders saw that it was just going to split the party. They convinced and there's a pretty small group of conservative Republicans that were pushing this. Their reasoning for wanting to impeach the Deputy Attorney General, who oversees all the investigations going on regarding the Russian meddling. It's like I said, I think they viewed that as a non-winner that speaks to certain audiences but doesn't help them as they go into the election. But in the larger sense, I mean, there's this whole concern among some people about the deep state. And let's face it, the bureaucracy in the Justice Department, the FBI, has been, faulted over the generations at times. I mean, the way J. Edgar Hoover ran things didn't certainly sit well with a lot of people. So, there is suspicion of the government and not necessarily just the elected officials. So there's a ready-made audience for that, and I'm not, disparaging that, because we've seen, some misuse of bureaucratic powers before. But this, like I said, in Duncan Hunter's case, really kind of seems to be this dovetailing with his own personal situation.
I did want to talk, and we're going to get to Hunter's opponent here in a second, but this remarkable speech on the floor, as you're talking about, it does kind of line up with a rather disturbing campaign rally that President Trump had in Tampa this week. He went after the press again, saying we're the enemies of the people. Any critical news coverage is fake news. Jim Acosta, CNN, tweeted a video that went viral, and he's whipping up the crowd. How dangerous is this getting for reporters? Because they're there covering this, and they're going to continue to cover it.
It's hard to say. A lot's been made out of it, and I think it is of concern. criticizing the press has been a staple of politics in America since the beginning of the country, basically. I remember when showing my age here, when Bob Dole was running for president, and people were reporting about his financial plan for the country didn't add up, and he would dismiss it as fuzzy math. And at certain rallies, he would almost incite the crowd to turn to the press and say, fuzzy math, blaming the press. Now, that's not the kind of threatening thing that we sort of saw the other day.
Yeah, enemies of the people is a strong...
An enemy of the people. But I think that you do go back and Richard Nixon certainly had that kind of attitude. The vitriol seems higher. To the degree that people are threatened, that is a real concern. It's always been a concern in my book. Is it more heightened now because of the social media and just that kind of infiltrating people's minds in a lot broader ways? And just finally, that you do have the president, like I said, other presidents, other candidates have made sort of similar things, but not to that level, almost to the point of inciting violence.
Lee?
I got a question for you, and Mark, you might want to pipe in from a media standpoint. Do you think the voters will get tired of the angry American atmosphere that exists that's been triggered by this president?
I think that's always going to be there. It's always been there. It's to a degree, as with racism, been a little bit more latent. I think what the president has enabled people to do is for that to surface. Before, in certain quarters, it wasn't acceptable to have that kind of attitude, and I think it's viewed that way. The gloves are sort of off even for regular folks now. I would like to think that we are going to get tired of it, but these are core constituents, and that's who candidates tend to play to, whether they're conservative or liberals, and they have always tried to fire up their core base. And in this case, Donald Trump is doing it in a pretty dicey kind of way.
All right, let's circle back to the Hunter race here. Who's his opponent, and who endorsed that opponent this week?
Well, Amar Khan-Najjar is a young Democrat. He lives in East County, which is a conservative district, the 50th district that's been represented by Duncan Hunter and his father for a long time. And he had served in the Obama administration in various capacities, sort of a mid-level communications person in the Labor Department. And in any other time, in normal times, I always like to say, of course, what is normal? He wouldn't stand a chance in that district, but with Duncan Hunter's problems and certain things he's done, he's raised a lot of money. He's run a good campaign.
More money than Hunter.
Yeah, he did. Now, in the primary, it's a sort of an open primary, and where everybody's running against each other. They're not separate party primaries. Duncan Hunter did get 47%, and Khan-Najjar got 17%, or a little over that. Big gap to close. It was a 7-person field, so we'll see. Now, his former boss, ostensibly, Barack Obama, did endorse him, which really wasn't a surprise. I mean, not only did he work in the administration, but Obama came out and endorsed dozens of candidates across the country and a large handful.
He was one of them,
up and down the state of California. Frankly, the biggest, I think, in the political world, the biggest buzz was who has joined his campaign to help strategize, or the strategy, a guy named Joe Trippi, who you've all heard of. He's a very sort of legendary campaign consultant for decades. Most recently, he helped get Doug Jones elected to the U.S. Senate in Alabama, a very conservative state, a Democrat, special election, which had all sorts of other circumstances and controversies. But, he's not saying this shows it can be done, to a degree. But his history is very interesting. He's worked for Jerry Brown, and he was sort of the main brains behind the Howard Dean presidential candidacy in 2004, which, years ago, but he really sort of fostered the whole internet use in campaigns.
All right, we'll leave it there. Lots more on this show between now and the election on that race and many others. Well, Padre fans got a chance to relive the glory days. Pitching great Trevor Hoffman enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame on Sunday. The good old days seem ever distant, though. Baseball pennant races are heating up, but for Padre fans, it's not just wait until next year, maybe wait until next decade. Lee, start with Hoffman. How important was he to the legacy here of the Padres in this city?
Well, self-made man, as compared to the greatness of the natural that was Tony Gwynn. Fascinating story. We all come from different backgrounds, and we all got to certain places because people helped us. Trevor Hoffman was a 165-pound shortstop from Orange County, got drafted by the Cincinnati Reds, could not hit pitching anywhere, converted into a pitcher, went shortstop, pitcher, went to Miami, didn't do much. Padre people saw him and said, there's something there, brought him here, They groomed him. He developed a second and a third pitch. You just think about what he accomplished over 16 years. 601 saves in the crunch time of Major League Baseball. When you got to get outs, he got it. Opponents hit 211 against him in his entire career. Phenomenal statistics. And he's a tremendous person, and he's beloved in the community. Different from Tony Gwynn, but what an honor.
And the next Padre we're going to see inducted at Cooperstown?
Who knows? We've got all these young guys in the farm system with a very bad franchise. It's going to take a while.
And there's a lot of debate now, just this current team, how bad are they? There's been that, I mean, Padres have a real high bar when it comes to bad teams.
Well, we got history here to pay attention to. Baseball has drastically changed. The big money teams, the Dodgers, the Red Sox, the Yankees, continue to have the payroll to spend. They can afford to make mistakes. The smaller clubs cannot. What's happened, though, is a lot of these owners have decided we're going to do it through the farm system. Because once you pour it into the farm system, you develop players. You control that player for 6 years. You control the amount of money he's making. We've seen what the Houston Astros did. Houston lost 305 games in a 3-year window. And then they got good, and then they got to the playoffs, and they won a World Series last year, and they're right in the mix again. The Cubs did the same thing for decades upon decades, and they've invested. Now the Padres have done the same plan. Their general manager, A.J. Preller, through ownership with Ron Fowler, said we're going to sign all of our draft picks and we're going to spend a lot of money in the international market. Now Cuban players are available, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, etc. The last 2 summers, the Padres signed 91 players, committed $101 million to the farm system. But those are all 17 and 18 and 19-year-old kids. That takes 3 years, 5 years, but at least they got depth in numbers. I would say by 2020, this has to be a playoff team. But they've got 35 kids in their farm system that are having really good years this year. A bunch of them had good years last year, so there is a progression.
Well, how long are the fans going to be patient? Because as we were talking before we came on the air, attendance really hasn't fallen off. It hasn't shown up at the box office.
That's a misnomer. If you go back just 2 years, their attendance has dropped off about 320,000 in a 2-year window. They might not crack 2 million this year in attendance. However, this is a different marketplace. You got Red Sox fan, you got Giants fan, you got Pirate fan.
Dodgers
they all
fans.
pour into the stadium when their teams come here. So San Diego has a unique situation. They do draw well because of the out-of-town teams. I told Ron Fowler and Peter Seidler, who I have great respect for as business people, you put a winner in here, you'll draw 3 million. Everybody in baseball is making money, but when the big difference between revenue from 2 million at the gate to 3.1 or 3.5 million, which they might get done here. Because what happens is all the Red Sox fans come here. Well, the Padre fans will support a winner. They'll pour back into the stadium once the product gets good.
Now, the Chargers, of course, we've talked a lot on this show. The Chargers left town quite famously a couple of years ago now. And this is the only big league franchise left in San Diego. Wouldn't you think that that would fall to the success of the Padres? We're the only ones that are selling corporate boxes. We're the only ones that are raising and marketing. We don't have to compete with anybody else on the big league level.
You have to win, though. I think that more than anything else, you got to put a winner on the field. And I think the patience of the fans has been tested. I'm disappointed at the product this year because the young kids they're force-feeding right now aren't having good seasons. And that's what you need, is the young guys to grow as the next group comes in, and that has not happened yet. They got to turn the corner. They got to be 500 next year. They're going to be a wild card playoff team in 2 years. Hopefully that will work because at least they have tons of numbers in the farm system, but it takes time for these kids to develop. You know, prime example is Hunter Renfroe, the right fielder. He was a very high #1 pick. Came through the system quickly. They really liked him. He's hitting .236. Now, he hits home runs. He does play a really credible right field. He's not there yet, but it shows the patience. They've been waiting 2 years for him to arrive. It shows the patience you're going to have. As I tell people, I think you need to go to Home Depot. They have 50-pound boxes of patience on sale. Buy a couple more of these boxes.
Now, San Diego State football, the Aztecs' last football team standing. They're in Mission Valley. Padres have any interest or preference in what happens on that stadium? Of course, we talk about that in this show a lot, the two of the dueling land use proposals.
Well, Fowler and Seidler have done a great job with their front office people making Petco Park a destination point. It's a crown jewel. Look at what Petco's done, not just for the baseball franchise, what it's done for the Gaslamp Quarter, what it's done for the convention center. I think the Padres, sure, they want to see San Diego State do well. I think the Padres would love to see a football stadium built there. We got the huge argument about the stadium crisis, which is better, Soccer City or SDSU West. I happen to like Soccer City because it addresses the football, soccer stadium. It addresses all the periphery stuff that San Diego State might need from a campus standpoint, but it also sets aside a huge parcel of land that if an outside developer from another city wants to come in and put an NFL franchise back into San Diego, they have that real estate set aside. I think that's an intangible that people need to pay attention to.
All right, well, we're just about out of time, but we will be talking, and Eric's done a lot of reporting on that, on those dueling proposals here, and land use by ballot box.
Look for things to heat up in September.
And they're going to heat up. Well, we'll be talking about it on this show. That was a good discussion today. I appreciate it. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Rob Creer of the San Diego Union Tribune, San Diego sportscaster Lee Haxall Hamilton, Michael Smollins of the Union Tribune, and KPBS reporter Eric Anderson. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today, and join us again next week on the Roundtable.